All right, we live, y'all. Greetings and welcome back once again. This is Amoni Israel, Solonomics 101. Yes. Love Project, all of that lovely, great stuff. I hope you're doing well. Took a little day off, to do some things. For those who just joined us, uh, welcome. Welcome to the channel. Have a seat, look around, raise your hand, ask questions, whatever it is that you may like to do. But as long as we keep it clean and respectful, we're all good around here. Now, I was going to talk about this, but then I started to ask myself, in what way should I approach this subject? A lot of the subjects I kind of have the overall thought, and then as I get closer to the time, then I give the direction as to where we're going to go. So today, I wanted to talk about New Year's Day, since that was on everyone's mind, looking back, forward, and beyond. And I put quotations on New Year's Day because we know, the new year doesn't start in the middle of the winter, but nonetheless, people are running around saying it's New Year's Day. So, hey, let's have the discussion about that. To begin with, the just an overview of New Year's before, or the thought of New Year's, as we say, according to this Gregorian calendar year, it is New Year's because, as we know, throughout the ages, there were different calendars. And depending on where you were and who was the ruling peoples who came up with these calculations for calendars, you would have the Julian calendar, the Gregorian calendar, you have an Egyptian calendar. You have all these different calendars for different purposes, civil calendars, religious calendars. So for this purpose in this diaspora, we are under this what is called this Gregorian calendar, and each of the names of the months have some meaning. Okay, this is very important because even though we don't subscribe to, or some people, and many people either don't subscribe to it intentionally or in ignorance, not really knowing what this is about, there are certain things that we subscribe to unknowingly. Like how you go to a website and you press the button, but you wasn't really reading it, and you subscribe. Next thing you know, you're getting mail, and you're like, I didn't subscribe, and you kind of did. You know what I mean? And so this is kind of how a lot of this system works. That we subscribe unknowingly, unless you click that little tight box all the way under the bottom, and you click it, and it says unsubscribe, and then you go to their website, and then you have to put in the information. Until you go through those links, a lot of times you will just sit around complaining about all of the spam email that we're getting, not realizing that somewhere along the line we agreed, knowingly or unknowingly. So let me share my screen. Let me share my screen. All right, boom. So this Janus business, right, which is what January, the month of January, is named for. Janus. It's a deity. Okay, a deity. The God, or deity of beginnings, gates, transitions, time, duality, doorways, passages, and endings. And so usually they have this two faces here. Let's click on it, shall we? This is the deity, so I believe it's a Roman deity. This is what the month of January is named for. And it's also within the months, and it's within the days of the week that a lot of these deities are being pronounced to be governed over the lives of people unbeknownst to them. Now, I can go into this whole thing about how January can't be the first of the year because you have December and Deci is 10. So unless some of the months still have Octi is 8. They say October is the 10th month, but Octo in mathematics has to do with 8. You know what I mean? So we can get into all of that to show you that in many other cultures the months were just counted off. But when they began to put names on the month, it kind of confused the thing, although within the month we still see that somebody was messing around. Anywho, in ancient Rome religion and myth, Janus is the deity of beginnings, gates, transition, time, duality, doorways, passages, and endings. He is usually depicted as having two faces since he looks to the future and to the past. It is conveniently thought that the month of January is named for Janus, but according to ancient Rome farmers' almanacs, Juno was the tutelary deity of the month. I don't believe him. They say it's usually not. Yeah, I don't believe him. Janus presided over the beginning and ending of conflict, and hence war and peace. The gates of a building in Rome named after him, not a temple as it is often called, but an opening enclosure with gates at each end, were open to time of war and closed to mark the arrival of peace, which did not happen very often. And it goes on. Okay, and it goes on. So they're saying, "Oh no, it's not Janus, it's not January, it's another thing," and that is for those who want to go into a full-on study on that. However, oftentimes this deity here is associated with the month of January, and people always say my New Year's resolution, I'm looking back and what am I going to be doing forward, this, that, and the third. So how they disconnecting it at this point, I don't know. We're going to have to ask the person who updated Wikipedia. Um, what was I going to say? So looking back over the year, as I said before, this has been an interesting year. It's been an interesting year. A very, I don't know, I don't want to say weird, but kind of weird year. Um, but we're still here, so we have to give praise to the Creator for another year of life, right? However, I found something interesting as I was passing and driving down the road today, coming to the house. The supermarket was unusually packed. So throughout all of these seasons, when the people say shop, then people shop. You know what I mean? So when they say go to the store, then people go to the store. So I'm like, why is the store packed? I keep forgetting every time. It's like, oh, it's New Year's Eve. I'm passing by the liquor stores, and the liquor stores, the parking lots, and the liquor stores are brimming, right, with cars. And I'm thinking to myself, some of these practices are not making sense. And it also helps to understand why the tone is set from year to year for the results that people get. Now, if you are going to enter into this space, I'm not saying it's the new year. They're saying it's the new year. So let's go on their premise. If you're going to use this as a time to say you're going to look back, wouldn't you want to look back with a sober mind? Wouldn't you want to look forward with a sober mind so that you can understand what you've done before, what needs changing, what you need to continue? But the premise is it's New Year's Eve. You're going to quote celebrate. You're going to get pissy drunk. You're going to do all of these things. And then you start the very next, what you're calling the beginning of the next year, in a state where you're not in control. You're not in control. So some of the things that people are doing from time to time and from year to year doesn't make sense because we're not really stepping back from what it is that the mass society says that you should be doing to say, okay, how is this benefiting me? Like right now, the liquor stores, I promise you, I'm like, what is going on at ABC Liquor? You know what I mean? The people's in there getting crunk. So it's either that we don't like our lives, um, we don't like the direction that our lives are going. We get excited every beginning of a year and say, yeah, this year it's going to be better. And then it ends up being the same because the steps for real change are not there. I was watching something that was speaking about New Year's resolutions and how many people start off like, yes, come this January, I'm going to have a New Year's resolution that this is going to happen. And then you start off running, and I've been there. Not necessarily a resolution, but just period, been there. And then you running, and then the next thing you know, boom, you're back at the same thing again because you didn't really plan your life out, or you think that just quitting cold turkey, whatever the issue is, whatever the bad habit may be, or to start the new habit, whatever that is, you just think it's just by the willing it. So, positive thinking, um, the law of attraction, or whatever the case may be. And then when we fail, that's when we get into a bigger funk for not able to overcome whatever it is. Anything that we're trying to approach and we're really trying to sustain our progress in what it is we're trying to approach, we kind of need to be sober minded when we do it. You know what I mean? Like, for instance, a lot of things that we are attracted to, and I've been speaking about this, have to do with um, our bonds, have to do with our trauma bonds, have to do with our unhealed issues. And so we set ourselves up for failure when we think that all we have to do is will it so, and then it becomes so, especially when it has to do with separating from people or reprogramming your mind. That stuff really takes work. It's not something that is a gimmick or some type of hype or whatever it is that they're making it to be. You understand? For those who just joined us, welcome. And so, just looking back, it's a perfect opportunity, since all of this thought and energy is in the air, to really just look back with a sober mind, to look at some of the things that you may not have liked in the years past. Take an audit or an assessment of where you're spending a lot of your time, where you're spending a lot of your energy, and is it yielding any fruit? It's like, imagine your time and your energy and your thoughts as a seed, okay? And we have different types of seeds. You have seeds for fruit that's going to bear, and then you have, shrubbery, and you have trees, and you have vegetation. You have all different type of seeds. We have to look at our thoughts and our doings and say, what type of seeds are these? And then look at the abundance of whatever it is that we have in our life. Because even if it's negative, it's an abundance of something negative. And if it's positive, it's abundance of something positive. If it's neutral, it's whatever it is that you reaped a lot of. Take a step back and be like, okay, why did I get a lot of this? Why did I get a lot of hating? Or why did I get a lot of loneliness? Or why did I yield a lot of um, you know, stress? Or whatever it is that you're yielding a lot of. And that helps you to take a look at, okay, what am I planting? What am I sowing in the universe that is causing me to get this result? That's number one of the things that I would say, is just take a look and where you spend a lot of your time, physically and mentally and emotionally. That's a kind of a clue along the way to looking at the things that you may need to change going forward. Um, Also, sometimes, like for myself, I'll speak for myself. When we're trying to move forward to a positive goal, or something that's a bigger goal than we could have ever imagined, and we get impatient, we have to also keep in mind that maybe the seed that you planted is not a lettuce seed. If you plant lettuce, you'll get lettuce in a couple of weeks. If you plant tomatoes, you get tomatoes in a couple of months. If you plant cucumbers, but if you plant a mango tree, you're not going to get the mango tree in the same time that you get the lettuce or the cucumbers or the tomatoes or the peppers. And so you also have to keep in mind, if you are planting and cultivating something that is bigger than you expected, usually fruit trees take longer, although in the end, the fruit tree is going to bear beyond the time and energy that you put in it once it gets to the point where it can sustain itself. But up until that point, you're putting in a lot of work, and sometimes it can be discouraging. And if you're on that path, if you're not on the toxic path and you've done all the work and you're pushing in a certain area, then be encouraged and keep going. You know what I'm saying? Fertilize the roots and keep going in that direction. So that's just a little bit about looking forward. Um, I wanted to talk about, and I'm not going to stay very long because I'm trying to go to the gym tomorrow. I was up watching this crazy. I don't even want to get into it because it's going to take me off course. But looking back just for a little bit, just for a little bit. Let me share my screen. This I saw that came up, and I was like, oh, look at Time Magazine trying to throw some stuff in the game. So this is The Slaves Dread New Year's Day the Worst, the Grim History of January the 1st. That kind of rhymed too, right? I did a video like this like a few years ago. I got a little copyright strike because I used the beginning of Goodbye Uncle Tom. If I knew that, I wouldn't have put that one in there. But hey, you live and you learn. So they wrote this one like a few days ago, December 17th, 2019. This is a 1830 illustration of a slave auction in America. Remember, I was telling you that a lot of people are saying Black Friday was the time the slaves were sold. I didn't remember seeing that, but I did share that I did remember seeing the beginning of the year quote, beginning of the year, January 1st, was a time that many people were sold. So it says Americans are likely to think of New Year's Eve and New Year's Day as a time to celebrate the fresh start that a new year's presents. But there is also a troubling side to the holiday's history. In the years before the Civil War, the first day of the new year was often a heartbreaking one for enslaved people in the United States. In the African American community, New Year's Day used to be widely known as Hiring Day or Heartbreak Day, as the African American abolitionist journalist William Cooper Neal described it, because enslaved people spent New Year's Eve waiting, wondering if their owners were going to rent them out to someone else, thus potentially splitting up their family. The renting out of the slave labor was a relatively common practice in the antebellum South and a profitable practice for the white slave owners and hirers. Hiring Day was part of the largest economic cycle in which most debts were collected and settled on New Year's Day, says Alex McCrossan, an expert on the history of New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, and a professor of history at the Southern Methodist University, who writes about Hiring Day in her forthcoming book, Time's Touchstone: The New Year in American Life. So, do you see the difference? One people is looking like, oh, yeah, I'm looking towards New Year's Day because I'm going to go collect my debt. This person owe me, that person owe me. On the other side, you were the debt. Your foreparents and ancestors were the debt, were the bargaining tool that's used to settle these debts. And so while people are looking forward to their future on one end, the other side is looking back and really not really seeing anything bright about the future. And that goes into planning, that goes into economics, that goes into how we spend money, what we do with money when we get money. You know what I mean? It goes into all the finances, it goes in all of that trauma from this even space right here goes into how and why a lot of melanated people, as soon as they get money, it's just about the now because tomorrow is not promised. That didn't just start from anywhere. That came from an experience. Let me continue here. Some enslaved people were put up for the auction that day or held under contracts that started in January. These transactions also took all year long, and contracts would last for different amounts of times. These deals were conducted privately among family, friends, and business contacts, and slaves were handed over in town squares, on court steps, and sometimes simply on the side of the road, according to divided mastery. Slave Hiring in the American South by Jonathan D. Martin. Accounts of the cruelty of hiring day come from the records left by those who secured their freedom, who describe spending the day before January 1st, which would be right now, which would be the night, hoping and praying that their hirers would be humane and that their families would stay together. Of all the days in the year, the slaves dread New Year's Day, the worst of any, a slave named Lewis Clark said in an 1842 account. On New Year's Day, we went to the auctioneer's block to be hired to the highest bidder for 1 year. Israel Campbell, remember we heard about Israel Campbell? Wrote in a memoir published in 1861 in Philadelphia, in which he described being hired out 3 times. That's where that saying comes from, that what you do on New Year's Day, you'll be doing all the rest of the year, a former slave known as Sister Harrison said in an interview in 1937. Harriet Jacobs wrote a particularly detailed account in the Slave's New Year's Day chapter in her 1861 autobiography, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. Hiring Day at the South, and this is what I had shared a few years ago, takes place on the 1st of January. On the 2nd, the slaves were expected to go to their new master, she wrote. She observed slave owners and farmers renting out their human chattel for extra income during the period between the cotton and corn harvest and the next planting season. From Christmas to New Year's Eve, many families would wait anxiously to find out whether they would be rented out and to whom. On New Year's Day, at the appointed hour, the grounds are thronged with men and women and children waiting like criminals to hear their doom pronounced, Jacobs wrote. And that's the book in the book Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. On one of these fateful days, Jacob saw a mother lead 7 children to the auction block. She knew that some of them would be taken from her, but they took all. The slave trader who took the children wouldn't tell her where he was taking them because it depended on where he would get the highest price. quote unquote. Jacob says she would never forget the mother's cry, gone, all gone. And then she says, why doesn't God kill her? Enslaved people who attempted to resist going to their new masters were whipped and thrown in jail until they relented and promised not to run away during the new arrangement. Older slaves were also particularly vulnerable, as Jacobs described one owner trying to hire out a frail, roughly 70-year-old woman because he was moving away. But the history of New Year's Day and American slavery is not all horror. The holiday was also associated with freedom. And let me take a stop right here and read you uh, from this one here. Let me see. This is this is William Wells Brown, 1814 to 1844. This is a narrative of a slave in the United States. So the summary is born on a plantation next near Lexington, Kentucky in 1814. William Wells Bell was the son of a white man and a slave woman, living principally in and around St. Louis, Missouri. Until the age of 20, Brown was exposed to and experienced slavery amid remarkably wide-ranging conditions. William worked as a house servant and a field slave and was hired out as an assistant to the tavern keeper, apprentice of the slave trader James Walker, who voyaged extensively, traveling to and from the New Orleans slave market on the Mississippi River. After at least two failed attempts, Brown did escape slavery on New Year's Day, 1834, aided in his flight from Ohio into Canada by the Quaker Wells Brown. William adopted the man's name out of gratitude and admiration. So he escaped. He tried two times because remember, like we had said before, Christmas was the time where they already know everything was lax. You got that from the 25th to the 1st to make something happen. Because after that, that's a whole nother year of waiting to have another opportunity. So I wanted to pull that up, but let me go back over here. The federal ban on the transatlantic slave trade went into effect on New Year's Day, 1808, and African American communities did celebrate, but the festives were short lived. Different slave trade abolition commemorations took place between 1808 and 1831. Sorry, but they died out because the domestic slave trade was so vigorous, says McCroson. And let me stop right here. Like the history and these dates are very important because the abolitionists um, in England and here were pushing for the abolition of international slave trade, which is known as the transatlantic. Okay, they finally get through. You have people like Wilberforce and different people who were trying to push through that this is inhumane. This is where the song, what's his name again? Who made Amazing Grace? What's his name again? His name is on the top of my tongue. Anyway, he was a slave trader, and he's the one who penned Amazing Grace. And that song is now I'm gonna have to go get his name. That song was about him realizing the errors in his ways. There was actually a movie done, Amazing Grace. I'm gonna tell you his name right now. John Newton, that's his name. John Newton. So if you look here, it talks about John Newton. Let me jump down. It says he was in the Royal Navy. After leaving the service, he became involved in the Atlantic slave trade. In 1748, a violent storm battered his vessel off the coast of Ireland so severely that he called out to God for mercy. The moment marked his spiritual conversion. And then it goes on to talk about, you know, he was in that stuff. He was in the slave trade and how he goes on to write this amazing grace song. And if I'm not mistaken, he's one of the ones. They got a few people to come in and testify who used to be into the slave trade, and they came to testify how gruesome it was and what was going on. And so, long story short, they abolished the slave trade officially, England. However, when that happened here in America, it created an issue, and so this is where they call it the second Exodus happened where after that time, America wasn't. ready to give up, you know what I mean, the goods. It was still too lucrative. So basically they, according to my recollection, they the Eastern Seaboard, which is Virginia, Maryland, South Carolina, they kept planting all of these cash crops over and over and over again. And then the soil became depleted, and then they started getting more property in the Midwest, in the South, Mississippi, Alabama, all of these places. After the Louisiana Purchase, they get more property. And so they started giving incentives for people to leave the seaboard, the eastern seaboard, those colonies, and go down into places like Mississippi, Louisiana, and all these places. They were giving them, acres and acres and acres of land to go into these places and to develop them. And so that's where this second exodus happens, where people began to be afraid of being sold down into Mississippi and this deep south where they would never see the light of day again. And so there's a whole thing that happened in this country. It was two mass migrations, one from the continent and from the Caribbean, because they took a number of people from the Caribbean to America. And the second mass exodus was the taking of the people from the eastern seaboard and shoving them downwards um, into these southern states. But I'll continue. Different slave trade abolition commemorations took place between 1808 and 1831, but they died out. Okay, I already read that. The holiday became more associated with freedom than slavery when Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing slaves in the Confederate States on New Year's Day, 1863. Slaves went to church to pray and sing on December 31st, 1862, and that's why there are still New Year's Eve prayer services at African American churches nationwide. At such watch night services, congregants continue to pray for more widespread racial equality 157 years later. Well, and there we have that. So that was an article that was written a few days ago about. So we was looking back, because what did I say? Looking forward. I talked about that. Looking back and beyond. Let me see here. I read that. This is another one to confirm that. It says if the gentleman had been in Kentucky at New Year's time, he wouldn't need to ask that question. Of all the days in the year, the slaves dread New Year's Day the worst or any, for folks come for their debts then, and if anybody is going to sell a slave, that's the time they do it. And if anybody's going to give away a slave, that's the time they do it. And the slave never knows where he'll be sent to. Oh, New Year's, a heartbreaking time in Kentucky. And this is out of uh, Lydia Maria Francis Child from the Anti-Slavery Standard. Leaves from a Slave's Journal of Life, Lewis Clark here. And so this was something that was widely known. Like they said, it changed over, it changed, but it began to get a different context. But just looking at the epigenetics of the situation and how, many people are still in the same position their foreparents were to a certain degree. Like, oh, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, another year, the same old thing, and nothing much is really changing. So how do you get it to change? Oops, let me change here. How do you get it to change? Are we going to bring the same information into the year, quote unquote? Are we going to bring the same mentality into the year? Are we going to make these wild and crazy, vision boards and journals and, all of these things? Are we going to bring that into it and nothing really happens? Or are we going to actually be willing to put in the work for things to change? Because that's the only thing that's going to make something change is actually putting in the work, because that's how this whole matrix here is set up. You know what I mean? Any other way, we're fooling ourselves. You know what I mean? So prayerfully, as we go forward, we actually just select something, one thing, relationship with your children, relationship with yourself, your health, um, learning about your family history so that you can better yourself, not so that you can argue with other people about who do you think we are and this, that, and the third, but so that you can uh, close the gap kind of, and bridge the gap, I would say, between the past and the present so that we can move forward and beyond. If you look at the landscape of what's happening now, nothing much has changed. Nothing much has changed because the people remain the same. The mentalities remain the same. It's not easy to change. You know what I mean? It's not easy to change because of the way we are wired. There was a book I used to talk about. It's called let me pull it up for you guys. It's called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. And why, and I know there's probably many other books, but I try to get some information, then apply the information. Because if we just get a lot of information and a lot of books and this book and that book and this book, and you never do anything, then you also become overloaded. It's called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, and the book is by Dr. Joe Dispenza, and he's into neuroscience. I believe I shared this before. Hold on. And this is one of the books that also help because it's talking about the neurology of it. Let me pull this up and show you guys real quick. If we're talking about real change, not just, oh, I'm going to do this, oh, yeah, I'm going to do that. This is the book here, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, How to Lose Your Mind and Create a New One. What I pulled from this book personally is just understanding the brain and how it develops and how we begin to store information and why it's so difficult oftentimes to change, and the synapses and the neurons and the grooves, the neural pathways that develop after we keep on doing something over and over repetitively, and then how to make new connections. Um, and then this is what this book is about. And it just, for me, it's just helpful. Don't, hold on one second. Oh yeah, I'm back. Babies don't be listening now. Yeah, sorry about that. So yeah, this is one of the books that helped. Just yeah, this is one of them that helped. So if you're really trying to make change, understand it's going to take time. Neuroplasty, what's up, Peru? Yeah, it's a lot. It's People ask me, what have you read? Not just one, not just one thing. What I usually study, really, it's my I'm my first I'm my first client or my first patient. And because I had generational things within me that I needed to understand so that I can improve, so that I can, pass the baton on to the next generation a little better than I received it, then all of this stuff that I've gathered or collected and applied to myself over the years, it's things that I was led to begin to understand based on what I was experiencing. You know what I mean? And so, and based on the questions that I asked, you know. And so these are some of the things that I've come across, that not necessarily everything that they're saying, but they're gonna have a piece of something, and everyone has a piece of something, and then you go forward. And but it's gonna take work. One of the things that I notice about our people is that we like to be excited. We like to be in that state of, ooh, wow, yo, you heard that? That was crazy. Like, these are the things that get us excited. And not all, but the mass majority, enough that it creates an issue when you're trying to move forward. You know what I mean? Because if we're talking about things like neuroplasty, or you're talking about things like synapses, it's like, I mean, nobody wants to talk about that. Who wants to talk about that? That's boring. I want to talk about the hype. I want to talk about things that are going to excite me and titillate my senses, and that's not where the healing is necessarily. Yeah, I mean that's not where it is, and that's one of the things I see with what's the name of the show? Yana Fix My Life. Some of the stuff she be doing, I'll be like, what in the world? You know what I mean? That person is gonna leave a little bit more jacked up than they came, because that's like something being an issue at the very core and root. And I know people have their different methodologies, but that's like there be an issue, and then you just jump in there and start yanking stuff out. You're like, whoa! Like if you're doing a demolition on a house and you're a contractor, you have to know where what walls can be knocked down, what are load bearing walls. You have to know certain things so that you don't knock out the wrong things at the wrong time. And that's kind of what some people, especially that show, I haven't seen it in a while, but when I did see it, I'm like, ah, yeah, unless you plan to be them with them for the long haul, that or follow up with them, you just went in there and just demoed a whole lot of stuff and be like, yeah, now go work that out. And that's not safe either. You know what I mean? Because people have to, the issue with some of this stuff is that you have to do it while you're still living, while you're still trying to survive from day to day, while you're still being a wife, or while you're still being a husband, while you're still being a mother, while you're still going to work. And that's very difficult to do. And this is why a lot of people don't apply themselves to it, because that's like unpacking and uprooting your house while you're still living in it and you don't have any plans to move yet. You don't have anywhere that you're going, but you are, you're digging out the attic and you're digging out the basement and you're throwing everything in the middle of the floor. That's a lot. That's a tall order to ask from people, you know. And so that's kind of why what I've observed, why no real change is being made. Um, I can go on, but I'm not going to at this point. I would just say, all praise be to the Creator. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Make sure I touched on just the points. I read that article. Let me drop the article in the box for you guys. If you want to read it at your own discretion, or if you want to share it, there you go. That's the article. If you want to read more about the narrative and the life, William Wells Brown, here he goes. So we don't have to necessarily dread going forward, um, if we're willing to clean up our past so that, or our present really, because you can't really go back and change the past. The past is what it is. You can try to make peace with it. You can try to understand it, but you really can't change it. Lydia Maria Childs. And that's what a lot of us have an issue coming to terms with the past. We obsess over it, and it's gone. If I only had did this, oh, I already clicked that one twice. If they only had said this, then this wouldn't. And I was that type of person, so that's how I'm like, if oh man, I should have did this, or what would have happened if this would have happened. And this is the book here. That after a while, you will drive yourself mad trying to go back and play, armchair quarterback and this is this amazing grace conversation. Playing armchair quarterback and saying what someone else would have did or what someone else should have done. It doesn't always work like that. So if you are struggling with, betrayal from family members or parents who didn't come through or siblings who it happened. And I know sometimes that's difficult, but putting it in that context helps to deal with it. It happened. Not if it didn't happen or if it would have been another way. That doesn't You only can do that. You only can look forward and say, what if this happens? What if that happens? When we looking back, we say it happened. Okay. And what happened as a result of this happening? Whatever the this is. What role did I play? And it's okay to identify the players in the game, and it's okay to say, who failed, whose responsibility it was, because sometimes even as children, if the elders or the adults did not do their responsibility or take their responsibility, sometimes the child takes that upon themselves, and then the adult who's now has that child mind takes what was the responsibility of the adult at that time and takes it on and puts it on himself. So it's okay to say, hey, this person failed me, the father failed me, or the mother failed me, or the caretaker failed me. You know what I mean? It's okay to say that and then leave it there, because people people fail at times in their life. You know what I mean? But sometimes in the healing process, I'll say this: you have to give back the baggage to the people it belongs to. You see what I'm saying? Sometimes, if you're that type of person, you internalize everything, or if you're the opposite type of person, you'll subscribe, everyone else's baggage, and no fault over here, no fault insurance. It ain't nothing your fault. It doesn't work that way either. Like, everybody has their part that they played, and it's okay to give it back to them. You don't necessarily have to call them back. I'm like, hey, I'm giving you back your luggage, but in your mind, because this is where the program keeps playing over and over in your mind. So in your mind, it's okay to say, hey, this is yours. This is not mine. I think you left this here. And then you'll begin to feel the weight lifted off your mind and your heart. You know what I mean? And this helps to go forward, not having that, whatever it is. I don't know. I'm just talking in generalities right now. But whatever that is that you've been carrying from year to year, from day to day, and it's making you very heavy, is because you're not letting it go. And I know people say, well, how do I let go? You release it. I mean, it's like asking your hand how you let go. You ungrip it. You release the tension, because that's restricting tension is what makes you hold on to things. And so when you do the opposite, it begins to relax your body, or relax your mind, relax your heart, so that it can be let go, and so that you can go forward. So hopefully that was helpful to somebody somewhere. I'm gonna try to get early sleep before they start trying to be busting their little guns in the air and waving it like they just don't care. So with that said, everybody have a blessed night. And yeah, if you have any questions or comments, leave it in the box, and we will follow up. Be safe, peoples. And be careful of them junkie drivers on the road, because they're in there getting crunk right now. All right.